Hey everyone, new patch, new update, new cards, new builds, new win conditions, and a new video talking about them. I'm going to combine the try videos and win condition formats together. So I'll go through directional cards, the win conditions, and the compositions. For this video we're just going to do dragons, elementals, murlocs, beasts, nagas, and undeads. We'll do pirates and demons for the next video as tribes are coming out slowly, and then finally Quillboars, mechs, and then the neutral cards. Keep in mind, there will be some old footage that I need for examples for the builds. Also at the end of the video, I'll talk about directional cards that lead to something or can be built around, but isn't really an endgame winning composition. Without further ado, let's start with dragons.
My dragon wrath is yours.
Tarecgosa and Prize Promo Drake is the same as it ever was before, but with a few new ways to scale. Previously they have a problem where if you only have 2 Tarecgosas that have massive stats, you'll need to fill the rest of the board with either Mantic Queen or Leroy. Now you have new cards such as Stormbringer and Electric Synthesizer to help out with combat. Ember Guardian also gives Tarecgosa Divine Shield, so sometimes you don't even need Nadina, but she is still necessary to round out the build. Don't forget about Sanctum Rester, as he gives additional health to Tarecgosa. There is also a major downside to this build, however. It is the fact that it's difficult to get multiple copies of these cards. Heroes that have an easier time finding them like Ysera, Cookie, Silas, and Galewing will have an easier time doing this, while other heroes may need the aid of Upbeat Duo to get multiple copies.
The fate of the world hangs in the balance.
Oh Kalecgos, you haven't felt this good to play in so long. Previously there was an issue of him being too slow, but now there's multiple ways to scale him up. Brad Bronzebeard, Young Murkai, Disco Shuffler, General Drakaseth, and Rylak Metalhead are very good support cards for Kalecgos. Especially Brand for doubling up the trigger on Kalecgos procs. Though keep in mind, Rylak Metalhead isn't permanent stats on most dragons, so be sure to activate on Battlecries that give you another card like Mrrrglr or General Drakaseth. And as always, don't forget you need Nadina to round out the build. Magmaloc has potential to be one of the fastest and biggest minions you can scale up in your game, but the problem with that comes with the fact that it's only one minion. Luckily, Murlocs and Elementals have various cards to not only help with the scaling, but also create a board around Magmaloc. You can either go with the build that uses Recycling Wraith with RockRock or Nomi, or you can do a build with Brand Bronzebeard, Tad, and Primal Fin. In fact, you can even be creative and do a Magmaloc build and combine it with a pirate build. But as I said, he is only one minion, so do make sure you make a build to help support him, so he isn't the only thing carrying your build. RockRock gives a board wide buff to every minion, so it can be quite flexible to fit in various tribes. Unfortunately, cards like Recycling Wraith, Gusty Trumpeteer, Tavern Tempest, and Elemental are required to get the most out of RockRock. So this isn't really a card that you can just work on its own. But once you got the necessary cards, you will scale pretty fast. Since you don't need a board full of elementals, you can stick in some cards from other tribes like Rylak Metalhead, or neutrals like Upbeat Duo. If you use those cards' effects on something like Tavern Tempest, it should help speed up the scaling off of RockRock.
Let's make this spicy!
Here's a piece of advice I tell everyone I coach. Do not do Nomi after turn 7, aside from really extreme cases. If you're Reno, you can probably make it work with your hero power, but it's still risky without Recycling Wraith. It's really slow to get him going, because you're buffing cards that aren't in your board. So you gotta use cards to help buff the minions even more, like Elemental, Dancing Barnstormer, Recycling Wraith, or Elemental. Be sure to triple the minions too so you can combine all the stats together to get one big minion. If you ever need to defeat a full stat only build but didn't invest in any form of scaling, well, you can do this build. It can scam a lot of builds with the cost of being absolutely destroyed by indirect damage, death rattles, divine shields, and cleaves. You can always buff them slightly with some battle cries or divine shields, but there will be times where it can't cut it. While it's not one of the best builds, do keep it in mind, especially when you need some extra strength and you're just trying to survive as long as possible. So Handloc, as I dubbed this build, is a pretty good build. It's great that it can scale Bream Charger just by playing Murlocs, and furthermore, Base Gale and Scourfin are early enough cards that give synergy to Bream's counter. Unfortunately, you need to get a tier 6 minion in Choral Mrrrglr to really get the build going. And while you're buffing Bream counter in Choral Mrrrglr, Base Gale and Scourfin are not really fighting very effectively. So be sure to either buff them with battle cries or use Operatic Belcher to help them fight. And also don't forget that Base Gale and Choral Mrrrglr can actually work with other builds. Base Gale can summon a Venomous minion, Leroy, or a buffed up minion if you have one in your hand. Choral Mrrrglr can combine all the stats you got, regardless of being Murlocs. If you're doing a Nomi build, you can hold some of those elementals in your hand and you'll gain all of those stats combined for the next combat.
Who knows what secrets we'll uncover?
The Murloc bread and butter. Basically the Murloc build that we've all known since the very beginning. You get Brand, you get battle cries, you get big minions. You get Young Murkai, you get an extra proc on your battle cries for more stats and value. This is everything you can hope for from Murlocs. And the best part? You cover the weaknesses of Venom Murlocs and Handloc. You can have Venomous Murlocs and buff them up so they can still fight once the Venom wears off. You can have Base Gale and Choral Mrrrglr have big stats and still get value from Bream counter. This is pretty much the ideal situation. But remember, you still have to play fast. Think wisely on what cards you're keeping. When should you go for more cards from Primal Fin, or get more stats from King Bagurgle? When should you throw Bran away, and when should you start picking up Selfless Hero? This is ideal, but you still need to think to get ahead. Leapfrogger is one of the earliest win conditions, but it's not a card you can just start building once you find it. You need Tidus Rivendare to get the build working, and then you need Monstrous Macaw, Sewer Rat, Reanimating Rattler, Rat Pack, and multiple taunt givers to finalize it. This is why I always tell people not to force Leapfroggers. It's initially really weak, strong once you find Tidus, and only becomes unbeatable when you find the right cards. Still, it is one of the strongest builds and it's tough to beat. Just know how to build it and when you should go for this composition. Mama Bear is still one of the best directional cards you can get in this game. Plenty of instant stats, as long as you play a beast, and then it leads itself to other builds like Felstomper, Banana Slammer, or Leapfrogger. Similarly to Nomi, you want to get your beast to get as much stats as possible by tripling. You do that by giving the first 2 copies stats for Mama Bear, then tripling them for a third time stat buff. Your overall game plan should be using her to overwhelm your opponents with big tokens and death rattles. If you're only relying on Felstomper as your scaling, you might have a bad time. While in the early late game you can get away with using a Felstomper to fight builds with little health, it will be difficult to beat compositions with triple digit health stats. That's why you need to combine Felstomper with other forms of scaling like Mama Bear or Banana Slammer. Banana Slammer can be used in every beast build. Whether you're buffing minions from Mama Bear, Felstomper, or Leapfrogger, you're going to make obscenely huge minions come out from death rattles. There's also some unexpected synergy with Base Gale. Get Scourfin to buff up a beast from your hand, summon it with Base Gale, and have Banana Slammer double their stats. Definitely one of the strongest cards right now, just make sure you can find a good way to summon a bunch of decently sized beasts. You're not going to win with a double sized Rat Pack token.
Singing the deep blues.
This build is surprisingly really strong if you can get it to go right. You might not be able to scale your entire build, but you can make sure to have 3 or 4 minions strong with little investment into higher tier minions. The biggest downside is that you need multiple Deep Blue Crooners. Upbeat Duo really is the key card to finding multiple copies. Once you have the Deep Blue Crooners scale their spellcraft, apply them onto Zesty Shaker for faster scaling and being able to get extra copies to put onto others. While you don't need Athissa or Critter Wrangler, it doesn't hurt to have them in your build. Also, don't forget to look at Lava Lurker or Cleave to really make best use of the stats.
He'll stay! Slow down!
Critter Wrangler is similar to Deep Blue Crooner, except instead of getting multiple Deep Blue Crooner procs off scaling, you're using Critter Wrangler. Luckily, this means you can use any spellcraft for scaling, and with the inclusion of the Zesty Shaker, you can have around 3 million strong with the spellcraft buffs. Sadly, you may not scale incredibly high compared to other builds. Your build itself lacks spellcrafts. Since ideally you want to have 1 Cleave, 2 Zesty Shakers, 2 Critter Wranglers, and 2 slots for spellcrafts, you're going to be spending your gold on rolling and finding spellcraft cards. It becomes much easier when you triple, but you still will only have 2 or 3 minions that can fight. Be sure to back up the build with Manta Queens or Leroys by the end once you make it to the final fights in the game.
A gift for Ajara.
Remember, Athissa only busts 3 Nagas. If you got only 1 Athissa, you need the other 2 to either be spellcraft Nagas or 1 Naga that gains something extra from the spellcrafts being played, like Corrupted Myrmidon or Eventide Brute. Orgazoa luckily makes her job easier since it doesn't take buffs and it gives spellcrafts. Be sure to find the right balance between spellcraft Nagas and non-spellcraft Nagas.
I am the first Crypt Lord.
Anub'arak makes cards like Handless Forsaken, Scarlet Skull, Soul Splitter, and Xylobones have enough attack to fight against other builds. But the problem is, you really would love to get Tyre's Rivendare and find him early to scale fast enough to fight other builds. Since his attack carries off to Death Rattles, it's really important for you to find Handless Forsaken and Eternal Summoner. Fortunately, when you get this build done right, you can bust through even high health builds. Just make sure you build enough health yourself to deal with indirect damage.
Reanimated. Repugnant.
Sister Death Whisper scales pretty well initially, but can easily get outscaled due to the lack of attack it provides. Even if you give your entire undead build lots of stats, unless you got a Anub'arak for the attack, you're going to have a tough time fighting high stat builds. Normally I would only keep this card long enough to give my mans enough health to not die to indirect damage, then start focusing on getting a lot of attack and death rattles.
Rise in your final form.
Eternal Summoner is the core identity of Undeads, and they fit in just about any Undead build. They benefit from the extra attack, the extra health, and most importantly, can scale all on their own. Unfortunately, you do need these minions to die to earn extra stats. That means you kinda need RNG to be on your side, but you also need to think ahead on how the fights will go so you know how to properly position your Eternal Summoner. But once you got this build going, expect to summon huge tokens that even high stat builds may have trouble with. Alright, now we gotta talk about some cards real quick. There are cards that can give direction, or you can kinda build around them, or they can be some kind of win condition if all things go right. It really depends on your situation, and in unique circumstances, they can be the reason why you win. She's important for builds with Kalecgos, Tarecgosa, and Prize Promo Drake, but what about those builds without those kind of scaling? If you can somehow get your dragon build to have insane amount of attack, possibly through cards like Low Flyer, Stormbringer, General Dracosath, or Electric Synthesizer, then you can actually make a reasonable build with Nadina being used as support. Otherwise, Nadina doesn't do a whole lot if you can't get your dragons to have high stats. The synergy is very good with both dragons and Murlocs, and in some cases you can actually have this minion be some sort of a boss minion for you, meaning it has good stats and it can fight well. It's great in the early game and mid game, and if you can get him big enough, can follow through to the late game. You wouldn't build your entire composition around it, but it's a good way to keep yourself strong while you do find a stronger form of direction. The Backbone Dragon support card. You typically don't build around her, unless you're someone like Katoon, I guess, but it's a good card to keep in mind with all of the attack dragons get. As well, she's very helpful with scaling when combined with Kalecgos or Prize Promo Drake. Recycling Wraith itself can't do much, but he does lend himself to so many builds concerning elementals and also Elise Treasure Seeker. You never know, maybe if you got some leftover gold around mid game, he could open up potential builds for you if you triple for the right cards. Combining this card with Tidus Remender can give you decent scaling on your elementals. It's not as strong as Nomi, so it's incredibly important to triple your elementals if you ever want to have a shot of competing against other builds. While Tidus helps, you don't necessarily need to get Recycling Wraith, as the Death Rattle can make up for the elemental recycling. Usually this card is included in Venomous Murloc builds, but a lot of people overlook the fact that it's also Undead. If you really need the extra help in your Undead build, you could put this in and have Soul Splitter give it Reborn to have double Venom. Rylak Metalhead is incredibly flexible in what it can do. You can have it give extra economy from Shell Collector, extra copies for a triple from General Sakasath, have extra in-combat stats from Menagerie Jug, or even use Faithless Disciple to change one of your opponent's minions temporarily to another one. This card fits in so many builds, not even in just beasts, so keep your eyes open for it and understand how to use it to the best of its abilities. This card is just good for temporary stats and tempo. Overall, quite solid whenever you need something strong while you're looking for the direction you need to finish your build. Powerful tempo card that has no direction, but is important to keep in mind. This can fit in certain builds like Felstomper compositions, but sometimes I would even get Coiler as a decent 7th minion to scam my opponents. You never know, it could summon a Leroy, or summon Slyraptor, which could summon Coiler, which summons Slyraptor, and go on forever for a big scam. Octosauri is a pretty good support for the other beast builds. It scales itself pretty fast, being able to summon a pretty big sized minion upon its death rattle. Think of it similarly to Hungering Abomination, but faster. It scales really fast on its own and is a reliable big minion for any kind of build that has multiple death rattles. Speaking of Hungering Abomination, this card is similar to Octosauri except you scale off minions that get destroyed. Get it early enough and should be able to grow big enough to help fight your opponent's big health minions. Really, it's never a bad card to triple into when it's early game or mid game, so always keep an eye out for it. This is one of the best cards to get during mid game when you got a build full of random minions. Lots of tempo, synergizes with a lot of death rattles and reborns, and can be something that will help you win fights until you find a better form of direction. Now with Naga's buff to early and mid game, Lava Lurker is much better with her abilities to retain the stats from spellcrafts. Get those cards early enough and you can see Lava Lurker get big enough to become a huge boss minion for your composition. Similarly to Lava Lurker, if you got early spellcrafts, Brute should be able to scale a decent amount. Unfortunately, probably still not as strong as Lava Lurker, but it's a good card to consider, especially if you got lots of spells. Notably if you're playing Lord Barrow or King Mukla. Don't forget, it also gains stats from using Blood Gem cards. The other Naga that benefits from stats being built up, except this one benefits the most from the extra stats, not only from Nagas, but from other cards like Lightfang Enforcer or Boogie Monster. I see a lot of players force this card. It's strong, but you gotta realize how tough it can be to get him big enough. Still, amongst Lava Lurker, Eventide Brute, and Corrupted Myrmidon, be sure to have one of these minions in your Naga build to help your scaling. Orgazova is important to help your Naga builds, whether it's to find important cards to begin the build, or to get triples to finalize it. Even in builds that don't focus Nagas, he's just great to have to generate free minions each turn. Being able to search out either more economy, divine shields, or stealth can be a difference maker in fights. Okay, so that's it for now. Be sure to look at the description below where I put out a composition cheat sheet to help you figure out how you should build your minions for the new update. Next video, we're going to take a look at pirates and demons. I hope this gives you all an insight on the current meta and what to look out for. Be sure to give my video a like and subscribe to my channel. It really helps out my growth and my goal to be monetized by the end of the year. If you're interested in coaching, I have multiple year experience coaching players in Battlegrounds, so consider booking me in Metafy or WeCoach. If you want to help support my channel in another way, consider donating to my Ko-fi. See you all next time.